Rolex is one of the most luxurious brands in the world, valued today at around $8 billion. Its history dates back a century ago and began with an orphan teenager whose inheritance was stolen from him. With nothing other than his determination to overcome his challenges, he ran away from his hometown and moved to another country. After a few years working his way out, he decided to follow his passion and opened a watchmaking business. Little did he know that this business venture would lead him to pioneer modern wristwatches, changing the whole industry and creating a billion-dollar empire. A series of misfortunes. Hans Wilsdorf was born in Kumbach, Germany on March 22, 1881, to parents Anna and Johann Daniel Wilsdorf. He was the second of three children. His family ran a successful business, selling iron goods, making them middle class. Sadly, his mother fell ill and died in 1892. A year later, his father also passed away, leaving Hans an orphan at 12 years old. His uncles took over his care, sold the family business, and used some of the money to send Hans and his siblings to a prestigious boarding school called Ernestinum Coburg in Bavaria, Germany. Hans disliked this decision and felt depressed in his new town. He was often teased by other boys because of his religion, making him feel like an outsider. To cope, Hans focused on his studies. As he grew older, he realized that his uncle's decision helped him become self-reliant, which contributed to his later success. Our uncles were not indifferent to our fate. Nevertheless, the way in which they made me become self-reliant very early in life made me acquire the habit of looking after my possessions. And looking back, I believe that it is to this that much of my success is due. Hans enjoyed reading and excelled in subjects like mathematics and languages, learning French and English. He was curious about travel and knew that languages would be useful in his future. At school, he became friends with a Swiss boy who told him stories about his hometown, Le Locle, a city in Switzerland known for its watchmaking industry. Hans became fascinated by the place, on his own. At 19, Hans decided to leave the boarding school in Germany and move to Geneva, Switzerland. He found a job as an apprentice at an international pearl exporting company. The company bought pearls from various markets, sorted, graded, and packaged them for sale to jewelers. Hans noticed that while the company wasn't creating anything, it was still making good profits. He learned their business tactics and earned a decent salary for his age. One day, he received a letter from a friend offering him a job at Kuno Korten, one of the largest high-quality watchmaking businesses at the time. The company, based in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland, exported about 1 million Swiss francs worth of pocket watches each year, and also produced some of their own watches. Despite the better prospects at his current job, Hans's curiosity about watchmaking drew him to Kuno Korten. In 1900, he moved to La Chaux-de-Fonds and was hired as an English correspondent and clerk. Thanks to his ability to read and write English, he earned 80 Swiss francs a month and was responsible for winding hundreds of pocket watches daily and ensuring their accuracy. This job provided him with valuable insights into watchmaking. However, after 2 years, he had to return to Germany to serve in the army. After his military service, Hans moved to London, England, at 22 to work for another high-quality watch company. He took on a bigger role, responsible for increasing sales. During his 2 years there, he successfully found more clients and grew the company's sales. By then, Hans was already thinking about starting his own watch business and continued to learn everything he could. During these years, he also met his future wife, Florence Frances May Crotty, and they married shortly after. Wilsdorf and Davis. One day, Hans was sitting outside with his much older brother-in-law, Alfred James Davis, and talked about life and plans for their future. Hans told him he felt he was confident enough to open his own business of watches, but he just needed some capital. Alfred did have the money and knew how passionate Hans was about watches. Despite being very young, he took a chance on the German and told him he was going to help him on his business venture and was ready to invest his money. They shook hands together, and in 1905 they founded Wilsdorf and Davis Limited. which would eventually become Rolex a few years later. They partnered up with a Swiss watch company called Hermann Agler, which was based in Switzerland, and started importing movements from the Swiss country to England, placing them in watch cases. They also opened an office in Biel, Switzerland, to favor his partnership there. Soon after, they were specializing in the distribution of timepieces at affordable rates. Even though Hans was a lover of watches, there was one major thing he found unfavorable about the watch industry: pocket watches. At the time, wristwatches were mostly worn by women as jewelry and were looked down upon by some. The reason being they were not precise in showing the time. These watches were much smaller than pocket watches and consisted of smaller movements, which would regularly make the clock either go faster or slower due to small details in the movements. This was the main reason why pocket watches were more popular at the time and were considered masculine for their bulky size. But for Hans, he mostly found it inconvenient to use. It was a hassle for him every time he had to reach his hand in his pocket in order to see the time, especially when his hands were busy. Until then, it was thought to be almost impossible to create the perfect wristwatch that could consistently show the exact time and be in everyday use. My personal opinion is that pocket watches will almost completely disappear and that wristwatches will replace them definitively. Hans Wilsdorf, 1914. Hans predicted that sooner or later, wristwatches were going to be the new norm for everybody and was fully committed to finding a way to create the perfect wristwatch. For it, he spent the next several years traveling to many countries all around Europe and met countless watchmakers to discuss the small details of watches. During those years, he started to release his own wristwatches. Beginning the same year he founded his company, one watch after another, he was crafting better, high-quality and reliable wristwatches for men and women, applying what he learned from other watchmakers from his journey. Soon after, his company began to get some traction, and by 1908, it was one of the top firms in the watchmaking industry in England. Hans Wilsdorf wanted a name for his company that was classy, catchy, and easy to say in any language. It also needed to be short enough to fit on a watch dial. After much trial and error, he finally came up with Rolex. He knew immediately it was the perfect name and registered it as a trademark for Wilsdorf and Davis Limited in 1908. Rolex quickly became known for its high-quality wristwatches, attracting many wealthy customers. When World War I broke out, many businesses struggled, but Rolex thrived. Soldiers preferred Rolex wristwatches over pocket watches because they were easier and safer to use, helping them coordinate attacks better due to their precise timekeeping. By 1914, Rolex had grown significantly, employing 60 people and operating from large offices in London. Rolex was the first wristwatch to earn a chronometer rating from Switzerland and received a Class A certificate of precision from London's Kew Observatory, making the brand even more trustworthy. In 1914, the British government imposed a 33% tax on companies exporting goods internationally. This concerned Hans, so he moved the company's headquarters from London to Vienna, Switzerland, to avoid the taxes. Another reason for the move was the growing anti-German sentiment in Britain during the war. To distance the company from its German roots, Hans changed the company name from Wilsdorf and Davis Limited to the Rolex Watch Corporation Limited in 1915. He also registered the famous 5-point crown logo that would become a symbol of the brand. In 1919, the Rolex Watch Corporation moved its main office from Bienne to Geneva, where it still stands today. The company focused on manufacturing watch movements in Bienne and then transporting them to Geneva for final assembly and quality checks. Hans and his team in Geneva worked hard to improve the technical aspects of wristwatches. They aimed to create a watch case that was completely sealed to protect against dust, perspiration, water, heat, and cold. Their efforts paid off in 1926 when Rolex released the Rolex Oyster, the first waterproof wristwatch. This model had a tightly sealed case that protected the watch's inner workings from water. In 1927, Hans heard about a woman named Mercedes Gleitze, who planned to swim across the English Channel. He saw an opportunity and asked her to wear a Rolex Oyster during her swim. Although she didn't complete the swim, the Rolex Oyster came out of the water in perfect condition. Hans capitalized on this event by placing an ad in the London Daily Mail, which boosted the watch's popularity. Hans also displayed Rolex Oysters in fish bowls at dealerships, showing they were waterproof. This clever marketing strategy worked, and people were fascinated by the watches. In 1928, Hans collaborated with top British model Evelyn Leigh to promote Rolex watches, using photos of her wearing a Rolex inside a fishbowl. The publicity continued in 1933, when Rolex Oysters were worn by crew members on a flight over Mount Everest, proving their reliability in extreme conditions. In 1935, famous driver Malcolm Campbell set a speed record wearing a Rolex. Hans publicized this achievement, further enhancing Rolex's reputation as a reliable and high-quality watch. Hans Wilsdorf's innovative designs and genius marketing strategies made Rolex a world-renowned brand. By focusing on quality, reliability, and creative advertising, Rolex became a symbol of luxury and precision, trusted by people worldwide. Hans Wilsdorf, the visionary behind Rolex, constantly pushed boundaries in watchmaking. In 1931, Rolex unveiled the groundbreaking Rolex Oyster Perpetual, the first waterproof and self-winding wristwatch. This innovation addressed the challenge of manually winding watches by introducing a mechanism that wound itself through the natural motion of the wearer's arm, a feat centuries in the making. From 1934 to 1940, Hans also produced high-quality watches under his own name, but faced challenges due to anti-German sentiments in markets like France, Britain, and the US, leading to discontinuation. World War II posed further challenges, hindering Rolex's export capabilities. Despite adversity, Hans persevered, but tragedy struck in 1944 with the passing of his wife. In her memory, he established the Wilsdorf Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to social causes. Shortly before his death, Hans transferred full ownership of Rolex to this foundation, ensuring it remains privately held to this day, a testament to his vision and values. After World War II, Rolex surged forward. By 1946, they had sold 50,000 certified Rolex chronometers, doubling sales in 1947 to 100,000. Their success was bolstered by the Rolex Datejust in 1945, the first waterproof self-winding wristwatch displaying the date on the dial. A decade later, Rolex introduced the Day-Date, the first waterproof self-winding watch to display both the date and day of the week, a standard for wristwatches today. Throughout the 1950s, Rolex continued to innovate with legendary models like the Rolex Submariner, 1953, the first deep-diving waterproof wristwatch capable of 100 meters underwater. Hans Wilsdorf passed away in 1960, but Rolex continued to evolve into the luxury brand it is today, catering to high society and emphasizing exclusivity in its marketing. In 1985, Rolex pioneered the use of 904L steel in watch manufacturing, renowned for its durability and premium quality, contributing to Rolex's status and pricing today. Rolex remains the world's most recognizable watch brand, a testament to Hans Wilsdorf's legacy. From humble beginnings as an orphan, Hans forged a path that revolutionized the watch industry. His passion for design and technical innovation continues to influence every Rolex wearer today. Stay tuned for more fascinating stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest discoveries. Let's keep exploring together.